go.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thursday, a second conversation of the week. Inspire and be inspired. Today we are talking about music therapy. I'll be talking to a gentleman that I've known for easily 35 years, thereabouts. And our paths crossed recently when I started doing my live talks on YouTube. And my good friend Chris Barron has agreed to join me, and we're going to be talking about his life from acid house to music therapy. Tonight I'm live on Facebook and we're also live on YouTube. As always, this conversation will be archived. I'll press my button and make sure that everything is working fine as I bring him on, as he clears his throat. How are you, Chris? You all right?
Yeah, good.
Wicked.
Good, man.
So I start off just by checking all of my screen, make sure that everything is working fine. I look to make sure that the audio is working and that both platforms are live, and they are. So let me give a brief insight. Our paths would have crossed back in the late 80s at some rave somewhere in Birmingham. Maybe you'll be able to tell me exactly where that was. We then spent many years running around the country like headless chickens, and a lot has happened since then. I want to find out about yourself, and we'll paint a picture for many of our friends that know you, because when I talk to people, predominantly they're well-known DJs or they're predominantly well-known producers, where everyone's got an interesting story, whether you're headlining a bill or not. And you've got some quite interesting accolades yourself, right, that you can talk about in this conversation. So take us back to before we met then. Tell us about yourself in Birmingham, when you grew up, and how you made that path into house music.
Yeah, so I grew up in the first part, pre-teens, Quinton, South Brum. I went to school there, 4 dwellings. And it was when I was about 5. I was like really attracted to drums and percussion, so I was like the kind of drummer boy in the school play, getting chosen to be on the percussion and the drums and that. And then my second part of my life in Brum, when I was 11, 12, we moved to Sutton. And kind of in the early teens, that started to evolve into more of a kind of a maturing process of, musical tastes and pulls to certain genres and that. But
okay, well, let me ask you very briefly about Sutton Coldfield then, because that is a lot of this conversation is going to be bringing a lot of things out the depth of my memory. I completely forgot that you were from Sutton when we were knocking about. So hanging up the parade, running around Sutton Park, all those kind of things. And it's funny, actually, you say that. I was driving along the other day, window down, in my very, humble motor. And something came over me, and I just thought there was never as good a feeling as that first time that you would have been in your car driving through Sutton Coldfield with a decent sound system on, when you're just able to drive. So it's crazy how you bring up Sutton, because that was a memory that just came back to me just a couple of days ago. All right, so I interrupted you. Go on, carry on.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, I guess, pre-teens, feeling drawn to percussion, just kind of tapping stuff everywhere I went, driving my parents nuts. And, they themselves, my dad was a trumpeter. My granddad was a trumpeter. My nan, she's Irish. Great grandparent, Irish roots. They were very musical, from looking in the family diaries and that. Gaelic singers, composers. But my mum and my dad played trumpet, but my parents were not really like massively musically influencing me, so they didn't really kind of get on to, this kid needs to get on a drum kit or something, so. That kind of got buried but it was still there. And that's one of the powers of music that I love. If it's in you, which is in everyone, somehow, some way, it's going to get drawn out if you're a musician.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess when I moved to Sutton, my teen years started. You know, he's into like Madness, the Specials, all that kind of ska vibe, and you know, and electro kind of started coming on the scene, electro and breaks and stuff, and just as that, just before that, or probably about the same time that was kind of coming into the UK, I was a writer, you know, a graffiti writer.
Mm-hmm.
That was like my pull was art and graffiti. And that's how I met a lot of people that you know, like Rob and John, because we were all writers. Before we got into acid house, we were all doing graff in Brum, like bombing trains and buses everywhere. And,
well, let me just pause you.
Doing the spaghetti jump.
Let me just pause you. I think we're losing a little bit with the buffering, but it's not too much of a problem. I just want to say good evening to anyone that is watching us on Facebook. Thank you. A rare live on Facebook to get people's attention. Thanks for being here. Jeff Jefferson says, "You're looking good, Chris." He gives you a big thumbs up. I want to say hi to Mr. Langford. Hi to Mr. Smith. How are you? Smudge Soul. Jimmy Who over on YouTube. Big up, sir. And Miss Harrington says good evening. So, yeah, keep the messages coming, folks. I can see them. Okay, so graph, funny you say that. I've mentioned it on many occasions. A gentleman who I consider to be, for my world anyway, sort of like a centre kingpin, for want of a better word, was Brad Hatton. And I would have met Brad tagging in under the subway in Sutton, coming on the train from Aston, tagging on the walls, and they were all down there with the lino, the boombox, and you know. So tell me about your graphing days then. Yeah,
so that's how I met Brad, and that was through writing, because you know they were all in Sutton as well. But that was, you know, the graph, the dance, and the DJing and the music started to merge. But I was like, you know, drawn to the graph a lot. The music came kind of second, but then the music took over. But I remember there was some kid at school who gave me a tape, and I remember I think it was about 83. It was Boogie Down Bronx, Man Parish, Boogie Down Bronx. I heard that piece of music, right? It just absolutely blew my mind. I was like, what is this? It's like amazing stuff. That hooked me in to, you know, street sounds, electro, seeing Style Wars, the graffiti art film, and the music and the scene, and getting drawn into that. And then I was like so into it. I ended up going to New York. You know, I was in the Bronx. We'll get to there in a bit, but the music started coming in, and then there was Beat Bop, Rammel versus K Rob. That track and Boogie Down Bronx were like, you know, proper mind blowers for me. That really like changed my life, and pulled me into the scene of graffiti writing, electro break beats, and which escalated into the, you know, kind of discovering acid house and that. But prior to that, I ended up going to the Bronx. Did you go with Brad? Because I know Brad had gone over there and he came back with loads of photos and everything. Nah, I don't think I'd even met Brad then, or I might have. I was only 16. Okay. You know, and there was quite a heavy tragedy in the family with a cousin dying. It had a real kind of heavy impact on the family, because our cousin was only a kid. So graffiti became an outlet of grief as well, you know, for me to kind of cope as a kid with that. What was your tag? What was your name? My tag was Jamsky. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so my parents thought, because we had family in New York, they thought, oh, you know, get him over to New York, but they didn't really kind of put one and two together, knowing that, it gets into graffiti, man. It all started in New York. Oh, what are we doing? So, I went to my auntie's up in Albany, a few hours north. But my plan was always, I'm going to the South Bronx, man. I don't care about anything else. I'm going to the Bronx. So, 16 years old, I was there. My birthday's November. I just turned 17 when I was there. And just before Christmas, I think it was not long, like in between November, December, I was in New York. I was at my aunt's. Said I was going to go to New York for the week. Dad kind of contacts there. I went down to New York. I ended up sleeping rough for a week in Manhattan.
Wow.
Bear in mind, I just turned 17. And I was.
And it was a completely different Manhattan back then as well, right?
You're talking like the Bronx, the South Bronx, which is where I was.
The South Bronx.
The South Bronx, the boogie down Bronx. Yeah. That's where I went. I kind of sneaked my way up there, hooked up with some people who I just saw painting and doing graph and that. Ended up meeting this guy and then just kind of like stayed in the South Bronx where Beat Street was filmed for 6 weeks. So I just traveled around the Bronx, and Brooklyn, Manhattan, everywhere, just taking it all in and just
was alcohol and weed a part of your life at the time? A little bit then, not massively, but a little bit was being introduced. Dabbling a little bit, okay. So carry on.
What I realised was that had a massive impact on me. That did, I mean, it was crazy. Really, it shouldn't have gone, but it was what it was, and I did what I did. But it had a profound impact on me, and it was, even the people there that I was kind of engaging with and coming into contact with were like, "What are you doing here, man?" It's like, this is where the eggs fried, man. And it was just, I was immersed right in the heart of hip hop, graffiti culture firsthand.
You saying that you probably put yourself right into the thick of it. Maybe it doesn't make any difference at all, but I also want to draw reference to the fact that it's not going to be apparent from this conversation that you back then you wouldn't have been the tallest as well, so you would have been quite small in a big world, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm
very short, really.
Yeah. But I think people respected that were there, and they kind of took me under their wing, and it was crazy what I saw. It was like a war zone because the buildings were being burnt down for insurance and everything, and there was just graft everywhere and drugs and prostitution, and it was like right on the doorstep, and like the real ghetto,
But I think when
white kid
casting back from just the million and one documentaries that we've all seen, in the grips of like the crack epidemic, right?
Yeah, the crack was crazy. Yeah. So I was there for 6 weeks and then came back to Brum, and then I did a stint in London for a year. Just kind of got a job down in down Wimbledon way, just to a make do job, bit of experience. But I think I went to a couple of clubs. I got in there, like hip hop things going on, and then came back to Brum after a year. And I think by then I was about 18. And then that was when I think it was through the graph that I was still into, and the electro and the hip hop and that. Somehow, some way, I don't know how, I met Jamie, I met Brad, I met Rob Johnson, John Paul, Gary, Gary Taylor, and kind of we all became friends, and that, especially me and Rob and Warner and Gary, and then I kind of met you somewhere in that. And then we were started going to. I think we were going to 49ers. I think it was 49ers and some other bar place up in town.
Bunkers or something like that. And
yeah, I can't really remember, but there were just little hangouts before the nightclubs.
So
it was just
go on.
It was just before Spectrum came to Brum, and we were going to go to Spectrum. I don't know what happened, but we never ended up going. But it was around then, 18, through the graph and everything, connecting with John and Rob, and we became really good friends. And then we discovered, like, going to raves and that. So we got into the raves.
Well, if anybody would have seen, I did a talk. It was actually quite strangely a year ago this week that I did the first of those talks on YouTube, when I was going through the diaries that Brad had given me, documenting the lost rave years, 88, 89, 90, which is this period that we're talking about. So we would have been, we started off going to the bars, a story that everyone relates to, going to the bars, drinking, and we started going to some soul weekenders. The one soul weekenders, we were all going there just on the beer, everyone smoking weed. And then it was like the next weekend that everybody had like got on it. That's all I need to say. And it was like overnight, wasn't it? It was the same story for everybody.
Yeah.
Up and down the country.
What was that one that we went to that you had that photo of us?
I don't know. I've got no idea.
I think that was the only one weekender thing I went to.
That was over Christmas and New Year, I think. Christmas and New Year down south somewhere.
Yeah. Because as you said, it started happening really quick. And then I think probably after that, it was like first kind of illegal rave and that, which I think was in Coventry. I don't know what it was called. I might have been with Warner. Rob might have been there. I don't know, but it was an illegal rave, and it was in Coventry, and it was the first illegal rave I went to, and that blew my mind as well. I remember going in there, there's like lasers everywhere. There's this glitter ball thing in the centre with laser lights. People have got these like little mirrors, and these like laser lights are hitting the mirrors, and they're beaming them everywhere. And it's just like a really culture shock. And you go in, and it's like, wow, this is like awesome, man. I can just get totally as crazy as I want. And no one ain't gonna care.
Well, that was it. It was just an opportunity for escapism. But what I've always said, and I always like to drive home, that when we started going out and drugs were on the scene, the drugs were there to enhance the music. It wasn't about getting off your head. It was about taking yourself somewhere to enjoy the music more, and pretty much all of our crew were like that for a long time. But then it did get to a point where some people would have to go overboard, and it was a badge of honor how much they could do it or whatever, and it got a bit messy for some people, which is what we'll talk about as time progresses. So tell me about how life changed for you when you started going out and because you're quite happy to talk about those early days of experimenting and what that meant to you.
Well, I didn't like acid, put it that way, but I did it. But I remember going to Starlight, and I only remembered that rave from your video. But then I remembered that I overdosed on acid at Starlight, and not intentionally. It was just way too strong for me, and I was tripping for 3 days. And it just really freaked me out. And I thought I could fly on that, I was having just like massive out of body experiences while I was in Starlight. And that put me off acid. And then I had a really bad trip in it. I'd done a few things before that with acid, but I didn't really like it, so I didn't do a lot of acid. But when the E's came around, that was, it was a totally different vibe, and I was like, "This is my vibe, man."
They tasted better. Actually, they tasted foul, but they felt better.
Yeah, it was probably at the Hummingbird, something going on at the Hummingbird. Or it might have even been that rave I went to in Coventry, but yeah, I did a little bit of acid and that passed. And then, but once the E's came round, I was like, yeah, this is my vibe. I'm in control, and the music is just beautifully enhanced. So I kind of really loved it, and that was it, man. Yeah, we, like you said, we just enhancing the musical experiences and the culture that we were getting kind of like involved in and becoming a part of in different ways.
For a full-on way of life. Well, Phil Gifford comes in and gives 2 thumbs up. Good evening, sir. A gentleman responsible for a lot of our madness in our early years. And Jeff's talking about the all-dayers at the Hummingbird. So let's start talking then about what you feel is some important moments as the time progresses. The music started to change. It started to get harder. We got to bigger raves. Remind me, did you get immersed into the Traveller sound? Were you more side by side with Rob more, or what? How did
me and Rob were kind of like that, because my parents moved out of Sutton to Tamworth, so I'd be staying at Rob's every weekend or Warner's. Mm-hmm. I did a little bit of the psych trance stuff with the Travellers. I can't remember what raves they were. I think there was the DIY sound system, one of them was called, or something.
DIY and Spiral Tribe were the main ones.
I had a little bit of taste of that, but I respected it, but it wasn't my thing. But I was glad for the experience. The one of the Traveller raves, 2 or 3 of them I went to. Let me think. So, yeah. I can't remember what raves I went to with Rob, but then it started. I remember being at raves and that, and then it was. I went to Rain Dance, was one of them. Definitely went to Rain Dance. I can't remember the names of the others, but at the end of the raves, you'd have to chill out bit coming down. Everyone's winding down, and like that was what I loved. Like I loved that bit of the experience. So then when I've kind of like started connecting with the littler venues and the smaller clubs, I was like, yeah, this is it for me. Because it's a different vibe and it's more like, what you'd play at the end of a rave, Mm-hmm. So, we'd just be knocking around with Lee, Baxter,
Lee Fisher,
the kind of Better Days crowd and that.
Mm-hmm. So we're still talking 91, 92-ish?
Yeah, probably... Yeah, 90, 91, mm-hmm. 92. So we kind of like started getting more into, the kind of the Balearic type of vibe, and that was kind of doing it for me. I was resonating more with that. Well,
one thing that's worth noting, and again, I'm just recounting it like everyone will always remember. The fact that the transition seemed to go so fast from young, wet behind the ears ravers into a certain sound to all of a sudden, not in an arrogant way, but there was a slight air of aloof to, well, I'm into this now. I'm more into Balearic. We're cool. We're not into that acid Ted stuff anymore. You know what I mean? For everyone, not just for you, for a lot of people, they went down that road. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely to a degree, but I don't know. For me, I mean, there might have been that there, but it's always been about just the passion and the love for the music. Mm-hmm. So I was just into the music, and I knew what I liked, and I knew what I didn't, and I knew what DJs I really liked, and respected, and wanted to hear.
Such as
and Lee Fisher, mm-hmm. Andy Weatherall, the Flying Crowd, the Faith Crowd now. Mm-hmm. The Boys Own crowd. So then we ended
were
up
you a big fan of Warner's? Because I know I was one of Warner's biggest fans back in the day.
Warner. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, Warner was like we were like best mates. You know, me, Rob, and Warner.
But his music side by side with Rob's, for example, would be poles apart.
Yeah, exactly. So I wasn't really into that. I liked it, but I wasn't really passionate about it. I was more passionate about the flying, the Boyzone, that kind of scene and that music. And so I kind of like got more into that. And I think we started going up to Venus in the very early days. I think we were like me, Rob, a few others, Disco Dave. I think we used to call him. He had a shop in Brum. Him and his mates. I think there was only a few of us that used to go when it first started from Brum. So we were there then, and then through that, oh yeah, flying down in Soho. Let's go down to the thing in Soho, down in the back of the Astoria. So we go down there, and and then within the midst of that melting pot, there was another melting pot, which I'd like to talk about as well, because Rob had a bit of a taste of that. And I kind of started going down that path a bit more. But we were all still really good mates, but I was kind of finding my own identity of who I am, what I'm doing as a percussionist and where I want to go. And what happened was Rick Jones and Amanda. Rick Jones's Scarlet Fantastic was the record No Memory became really big on the Balearic kind of scene. Well, Rick, it was a Brumley. I didn't know Rick, didn't even know about that song. Was just introduced it through Reverall playing it at Venus. And somehow, some way, I don't know how, just the synchronicity of things, Rick Jones, who was responsible for Scarlet Fantastic, I think Swan's Way was his band before that. He was an 80s pop star from Brum, and he had this hit, Scarlet Fantastic, No Memory, that went really big in the Balearic thing. And somehow, some way, I came into contact with Rick because he heard about me and he was looking for a percussionist. And so he put this party on in, I think it was Spark Hill, and he wanted to meet me and a few other different people. So he put this party on, and we all kind of went round to Rick's house. I met his missus, Amanda, and Amanda's brother, Richard, Groovy Rich.
Groovy Rich and Disco Dave, brilliant names.
Yeah. And I think Rob was there, John, a few others. And somehow, in the midst of all that, we knew Timmy Abbott, who worked for Creation, Timmy the legend. We knew Timmy as well. And somehow Timmy knew Rick because, they were more kind of involved in the music production and promotion and that sort of stuff with Creation and that at the time. So anyway, one thing led to another. We were at this party around Rick's house. We got chatting. Rick says, "Oh, yeah, you'll have to come round and get on some percussion here, and we'll see what happens." And so we ended up having a band, and we called our band Chocolate Buddha. So there was Rick Jones, right? So yeah, the funny thing was, right, because Rick, he had all these like Scarlet Fantastic T-shirts with No Memory on them, right? I was like, give me one of them, go over. So because they were like, they like gold dust. So he gave me like a load of them, right? And I handed them out, and passed them around. I'll be up Venus, right, with this Scarlet Fantastic T-shirt, No Memory. People come up to me, well, they thought I was in the band.
Well, we've had Lee Fisher coming in, giving you a salute. So it's nice to have Lee. And Phil Gifford is giving me some grief because he's saying I was going on about Rick Andy on our chat. Trazine's on a Monday night, a legend of Birmingham, and he's also giving you some salutes, saying, "Yep, Timmy, Rick, Scream, Creation." Phil, it comes in one ear, goes out the other, mate. My memory's getting worse. The whole point of me having these conversations was to try and piece the jigsaw together. And if anything, there's too much information in there now. I'm forgetting it all even more. Okay, so...
I'm getting super excited on it, man.
It's great.
So
it's really good to reminisce.
So in that melting pot, there was like Better Days, Lee, we were connected, and Dick, and that. And there was a bit of the indie stuff going on and that, and we loved all that. And then, so I got involved with Rick. We started a band. We did the Scenes night, and that was like disco, funk, with kind of house thrown in. So we do a few gigs there. And tell you what, that club ran 2 years on a Monday night. I think it was 2 years. Monday night, and it was like 200 people over, packed, and it was bursting at the seams on a Monday night. I
remember saying to Phil, it's all a blur to me. I don't remember any of it. So we were there. I played percussion there, and we'd do gigs, and then we met Tim, and Tim loved it. And he invited us down to London. We went down to London, and he was going to get us involved with creation, but we were all so off our heads, man. It just didn't materialise because Rick was like, on another planet. I was on another planet. And you'd left work by this point. You were just...
I was working in the jewellery quarter still. Yeah, for Nunny. Schoolmate, Martin Nunny. We went to school, me and Martin. Best mates. So I was working for Martin's dad in Hockley at the jewellery quarter.
Wow. See, again, something I'd completely forgotten about.
Yeah.
Big up to Martin and Matt.
That was all going off then, but it was a great experience. It's part of, what we call in music therapy, your music autobiography kind of journey, what I do with people. But yeah, as things started escalating more, and what you didn't know then, now, how it affected me mentally. I had like so much no confidence. I was like a young bloke, early 20s. My confidence was so low, so I couldn't really network very well and connect and fulfill what I really wanted to do, was just play percussion all the time, with DJs and stuff. And I just did a little bit of that, but we were all off our heads, and my confidence was so low. And my social anxiety.
How did it start? How did it? Sorry, for some reason I'm getting a little bit of buffering on you. So that's why it would appear I'm talking over you. Where do things start to unravel? So
it got to the point where we were like, you couldn't go out without doing drugs, and that was the point where, what's going on here,
smoking a lot by this as well, smoking a lot of weed,
smoking and taking a lot of ease, and then at the point where you couldn't go out really without enjoying yourself on a few E's. But obviously that takes its toll and affects you mentally, So I started getting into a kind of like a depression, I'd say, back then. And, the social anxiety, the lack of confidence and all that, affecting my life on a day-to-day level, and then the loneliness and kicking in, and the not being able to connect, and kind of disillusioned. Who am I? Where am I going? What's it all about? And the scene becoming very intense, and the taking becoming very intense. And we were really excited about this thing with creation potentially happening with Timmy, but it didn't happen. But it's all right. But we were really excited about that, and that didn't happen. And then things just kind of started disconnecting, and we were pretty kind of off our heads, Rick, me, Mandy, and Rich chocolate Buddha band, and going out with, listening to Lee play a lot, and all these little gigs, and it was great, and the wobble and all this sort of stuff, and it was brilliant. Then you got to a point, like I said, you find it hard to function on a day-to-day level. And I thought to myself, because I'm like really creative in my mind, my imagination, it was really getting me out there. And I thought to myself, if I don't kind of try and get a grip on myself or look at this, I'm going to end up in a psychiatric hospital. I'm going to kill myself, because the life was so hedonistic and screwing you up. And what I did was, it was then, I was living in Erdington, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to go to the monastery, because my mum and dad used to go home every like three months or so, check in with your folks, take your washing home and all that. And my mum and dad, devout Catholics, Irish roots and that. They'd tell, what have you been doing, folks? We went to the monastery this weekend. Oh yeah, what'd you do there? And it wasn't really for me. I didn't really kind of get it. But when I was at that point where I need to do something, it just came into my head: go to the monastery, and when you get there, you'll be all right. That was all I thought in my head. I didn't know what was going to happen or what I was going to do. But yeah, I just went to the monastery.
So where's the monastery?
The monastery's in Charnwood Forest in Leicestershire, just off the M1, like Junction 25, I think, round there, Charnwood Forest. The Trappist monastery.
Oh, sorry, I lost you there.
Like
you buffered. What was you saying about the monastery?
It was a Trappist monastery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which means what? Sorry, explain.
Yeah, so they're like kind of like contemplative, prayerful kind of order of brothers, monks. They live at the monastery, they work and pray. You got the abbey. They sing the psalms and that. Mm-hmm. And that blew me away. So I go in the abbey. You see, sit down. What I didn't know is they're singing the psalms. And I'd just sit there listening, thinking, what is this, man? This is like beautiful. It's amazing. It just like come and wash over me. And I'd just sit there going, wow, I just feel so peaceful, man. This is better than anything.
And you were a resident there?
I was only there just for 3 days then.
Okay.
Yeah, at that point in my life, just for 3 days. Yeah. So when I went there, I came out of there. Yeah, I don't know. In a nutshell, my life was changed, really. It had such a beautiful, profound impact on me. I didn't want to take anything anymore. I didn't need to, because I just had this kind of really deep peace in me. And I wanted to find out more about that. So I kind of needed to kind of come to terms with mental health, social anxiety, and all this sort of stuff, and kind of had to come out of Brum, because it was doing my head in too much, everything, and I had to leave the band, and they were all really upset, and I just had to get out of it, and we kept in touch. But one of my regrets is I did lose contact with a lot of people, and my life had to go on the path it went on for my own health and safety.
your own mental strength. Okay, so tell me the first major thing that you can pinpoint and say, this was the first thing that I changed when I came back, aside from taking drugs.
The main thing I changed, it was just kind of like my moral kind of values. I kind of stayed single for a long time, and we just focused my life on on a different path of not being involved anymore in the band. I had contact with Rick and Mandy and Tim and that, and Rob every now and then, but it kind of got lost. But I was just focused on, I want to get a job doing what I want to do, what I love, and kind of start making a living and having what we might call a normal life, like get more grounded, and, get married, settle down, and just, have the music and that as something that's just kind of there, but not kind of, living a hedonistic lifestyle in the midst of a crazy scene. That amazingly is global and had a massive impact on the world, which is awesome, and I love it. Because who would have ever believed back then that house music would have had the impact that it had?
So was it a hard process, a hard journey, or did you find it relatively easy, relatively quickly?
No, it was really, really tough, because kind of just letting go and leaving, getting out of Brum, And I remember when I'd go back to Brum to visit and get on the train, man, it's like I'd have so much social anxiety coming on me. I'd have to get off the train and go back to Litchfield, because my parents lived in Litchfield, because I'd just be shaking and everything, just because of the memory of the lifestyle and the losing my mind and everything,
Deep.
Yeah. And then, I'd always loved the percussion, just started playing percussion in different bands and things, and discovered drum circles, and loved the drum circle. I was at a festival, come across a drum circle, it just had a really powerful impact on me. So I got into drum circle facilitating, and then it was through the drum circle facilitating that.
When you say facilitating, is that sort of like being like the maestro, the ringleader? Not the ringleader, what do you call it? Conductor, that's the word.
Conducting, orchestrating the drum circle and that, I got into that, and my life was kind of like focused in that, and I got married, that sadly all fell apart. I had 2 boys, twins, Colin and Joel. From that marriage, we now have 22, and that kind of really messed me up.
Do you know, I'll ask the question and you can answer it as much as you want or as little as you want. Can you pinpoint why things didn't work? Was it just a sad, just the way that things progressed?
Yeah, it just, I think there was too much mental health going on, and, not being able to cope with the stress of like twins and, all that whole thing of the first year, the traumatic birth and everything, and just what hit us, just couldn't cope, and both mental health going on, and it's that split, and I was still playing a lot of percussion and that around, and I took the drum circles then. This is the journey then into music therapy, so took the drums into mental health hospitals, because I had a mate who was an OT, and he said, "Oh, you come in," because I was like asking, like I was decorating then at the time and doing music on the side, but wanting music to be the fourth thing and decorating on the side. But mate, he says like, "Oh, come in and have a look at what we do here and that." So what happened was I used to go to a medium secure ward, mental health hospital, on a Friday morning to what was called a music appreciation group, and I'd take a drum or two in, get to know people. They'd listen to a song, I'd pass some percussion around, we'd play along, and then what evolved from that was like a drumming and percussion group, and they offered me a job there, working in the hospital. So I did a lot of drumming in the hospital, and I created this program called Drumming for Health. And it was really effective, and people really loved it.
You've mentioned about drums. We didn't really spend a short period, actually focusing on the instrument. So tell us about the instruments that you began with. Skins mainly. To be
skins, hand drums, bongos, congas, the tracines and that, and with Rick, just the bongos and the congas and the
and then that continued into the therapy. So sorry, I just wanted to just double check that because I know it progressed. So Friday morning doing the therapy. Yeah,
so that became really popular, and they gave me a job there. We set up this program called Drumming for Health. So there was a doctor there, right, from Sri Lanka, and he loved percussion. So he really was enjoying what I was doing. So we started sending all these patients to me, right? And they come on the program. And, he came to see me one day, right? He says, Chris, what are you doing with my patients? And I thought I was in trouble. I was like, what do you mean? I'm not doing anything. Am I in trouble? Like, he said, no. This is what you're doing is brilliant. Whatever you're doing, we need to talk about it and unpack it. He says, because every patient I'm sending to the Drumming for Health program, on my caseload, I'm reducing their medication. Those that aren't are still on the same dose, and it's sustainable, and their moods are improving, and there's genuine, tangible signs of recovery going on here. And I was like, wow, this is mind blowing, man. So Dr. Yogi, he really got on board, and that was what triggered me wanting to know what was going on, psychologically with these people, with music and emotionally, which got me interested into music therapy, which then discovered the hung sound sculpture, from there in the very early days.
All right. Okay. So by this point, just with a timestamp, I kind of lost the track of time from about 93, 94. Where are we at this point? 97, 98?
Now we're like, I came out of the scene about 93.
Okay.
Went to the monastery, got married later on, spent a few years just kind of, getting some kind of a life and just doing what I was doing. And then that was about 2001.
Okay.
Let's say. Right. Yeah, okay. 2001, right. 2002, around then at the hospital.
So then you mentioned about the drum. I don't want to mispronounce it. Is it called the hang drum or the hung drum?
Yeah. It's spelled hang, but pronounced hung.
Okay.
Not a drum. That's why we call it sound sculpture.
Okay. Well, the way you feel free to correct my ignorance.
No, it's all right.
And this is what we see. It's on the thumbnail of the talk that we did. Explain what it is.
Yeah. So basically, the hung sound sculpture is an invention from a small family in Switzerland. It's a melodic percussion instrument. It's got a very distinct tonality to it that has resonated with kind of a lot of people around the world. It's had quite an impact.
I always thought it was Southeast Asian, or is it a development of something similar in Asia, or no?
So the hung originally, the hung is influenced by different cultures, different percussion instruments. So you've got gongs, gamelams from Southeast Asia. You've got udus and gatams from Africa. You've got the Caribbean steel pan. You've got the Swiss bells and everything in there. So there are multicultural influences in it. But because the hung is such a new instrument, not mass-produced, made by hand by a small family, you had to write them a letter and get invited. And then on the back of that, people started trying to copy and reproduce, which became what's called the hand pan. So they look like the hung, but it's not a hung, it's their hand pans. So that's the hung sound sculpture, yeah. Then the very early days, it's always been a work in progress, because now there's a whole ensemble. Yeah, I ended up, look, fortunately, I got invited over because I was studying percussion in Nottingham for a year. And I met a guy who had one. That was like the very early days, the first generation hung. And I was like really intrigued. What is it? That's like beautiful sound. Can I have a go? It was like, sat on my lap, had a little go. He gave me the address. I wrote him a letter. I said, I'm working in hospitals and percussionist, really interested in your instrument. Is there any chance I could get one? And they said, yeah, come over, if you want, come spend some time with us. So I went over. We've been friends ever since because they're really kind of pro music therapy.
I probably should have preempted this. The way you're explaining it to me is really, really interesting. Have you got one there you can show us? Have you got one we can hear? No. I should have.
There's one in the other room.
Go and grab it. Can you?
Okay,
or is it inconvenient? Thank you everyone for being here. Loving this conversation. If you're just passing through, Chris and I have known each other for 30 plus years. Really interesting conversation about his journey from acid house into music therapy. Let me just roll back. I want to say thank you, Sean, for your message earlier. I didn't want to interrupt Chris. I'm glad that you're loving all of the shows. Respect. Shout out to all the Birmingham crew. So here we go. The hung sound sculpture.
Yeah. So basically this one, you kind of wear this. It's got a strap. We got this bass here.
Mm-hmm.
This is called a hung ball. Hung ball. It's like one part of the ensemble. You can see
even though it's a ridiculous thing to say because it's a percussion instrument, you are striking it, but do you also rub it? Does it?
Yeah. Caress it and sculpt it.
Mm-hmm.
You can use percussive techniques with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure people will go off and start doing some Googling of different things. So let's get back into you being introduced. Thank you for getting that for me. Right. Introduced to the guys in Switzerland, them really warming to you. And then where do we go?
Yeah. So I got hung, came back home, and I remember, I think it was one weekend, I was really skint. So I went up Tower Hill and started busking because there weren't many of these around. And like I was raking it in, man, just sitting there with this hung, playing. And I thought, you know what, man, I'm going to do some more of this. So I made a few pounds like busking, like a few hundred, and then went in the studio, knocked out a CD in a day, just improvising with ideas that I had. And the guy produced some CDs for me. And that was it, man. I'm like, I'm off. I went to France and just travelled around the world busking for a few years, about 3 years, when the hang was like in its early days. So it was amazing because I had that opportunity to travel around with this instrument and introduce people to it, and get invited to play at things and that. And so I went from Hong Kong, San Diego, everywhere in between, Europe, Eastern Europe. Yeah, it was a really good experience, just traveling around playing.
Mm-hmm.
And
it sounds very, very much like the late 60s, early 70s kind of hippie vibe, but not on a hippie style.
Yeah, and that was really healing for me. Mm. Recovering from the trauma of breakdown of marriage and that. And yeah, if I didn't have that, I don't know, I would have had music in some other way, but just being able to travel, switch off, find some healing and recovery through this instrument and meeting other people and being invited to play and making different connections around the world. Mm-hmm.
So how has it been? How has it been adopted so much by the rest? Like everything, people jump onto it. So there's definitely something there. And I've a few years ago, I was working on a website for someone who was doing sound sculptures alongside cacao ceremonies. Am I pronouncing that right? Retreats. So that the whole it's like a cool thing now, or it's been a cool thing for some time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've done a little bit of that. Played at what is it? Ecstatic Dance Vibes. The ecstatic dance thing is quite big in Bristol. I've done a few gigs for them, but for some reason, it's got a particular sound that lends itself to kind of a spiritual experience, as well, and the meditative kind of vibe on it. So, I think that's why those kind of crowds really gravitate to integrating it into their things that they do. But that's where, because people couldn't really get a hung easily unless you were invited, started making their own, which become the handpan. But I stuck with the hung because I discerned the sound. I had a few handpans, but it was nothing like the hung. So I just kind of decided to stay with that and keep my connection with pan art. And in that time, I went to study, trying to get degree in music therapy and MA. Did loads of research, was collaborating with pan art. And by now, we're like, the hung's evolved. There's other hung instruments. There's the whole ensemble. Different percussion pots and pans and strings, and it's magical. So I stuck with them and stuck with the research, stuck with the therapy, and they're really interested in that. So they kind of supported me financially to train, and I'd feedback with them, go over every year, kind of collaborate, talk, which helps them kind of decide on developments and things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a step aside from when you had your social anxiety and not wanting to interact, to all of a sudden going out and wanting to reach out and actively looking for other people who you can heal.
Yeah, because I think my own journey, just with the instrument and with the music, being my ally, it'll be my therapist with me. Mm-hmm. Gave me the healing and the self-confidence and the self-belief, and I can do what I want. I can be who I want, and I can go where I want. And I always have my instrument with me, and I'm not like, if you took my instrument away, I'd have a breakdown, but I would be very upset. Because it's all about the music for me. It always has been. That's why I'm a music therapist now. Mm-hmm.
And did you've written specific programs?
I wrote a drumming for health program for the NHS and implemented that, and a lot of training for OTs and people that work in mental health professionals. So
you mentioned about that earlier when you spoke to the doctor and he said, "What are you doing to my patients?" Did you? Was ever any study that came out of it with regards to, you can pinpoint what it actually is, what the healing nature of what you're doing? Did it ever come to light?
Yeah, I mean, it's common knowledge. I didn't know about it. It's all researched scientifically within the academic and therapeutic psychology worlds. There's a thing what we call communicative musicality, and in basic terms, that is we're music's in our DNA. We're all naturally born musical, and it's part of our human development. Depending on our environments and our cultures that we grow up in, that's either nurtured, and you naturally, discover music within that culture in a way that's accessible, and not where you're not judged on performance base, but you're integrating into the community, sharing the music, playing the music, being a part of the community at the ceremonies and different things that go on within those communities. That music is innate for all of us, and the way we all process music is the same, through the ears, through the body, and into the brain. It affects behavior, mood, and emotions, and that's what was happening in the drum circle, in particular with rhythm work, because the frequency and the vibration is quite powerful with the drum. In a circle, they were kind of getting, like the brain was kind of vibrating, like inside, very subtly. So which would open up the neural pathways, start giving them little more extra drips of dopamine, and serotonin and all the happy chemicals. That's what was bringing the doctor to produce the medication. So the program then was like evolved into the communities, and when people were discharged, they could come to community drumming to help sustain them and prevent relapse and readmission and stuff. It's not just drums; it's just music in general. And the amazing thing is about house music. What I love about house music it is the ancient healing rhythm that comes from Africa, and I'm like just so blown away about that, and tracing that and the roots and the impact that it's now had on the world. It's because it's a healing rhythm. That's why the world connects with it, and it comes from Mother Africa, and it's the heartbeat of humanity. That's what house music is. It's the heartbeat of humanity, and that's why we're connecting with it on a global level, because we're all connecting with this pulse and this beat that's primal to us, and it's healing, and you don't have to take drugs. And if you want to enhance the experience.
We're getting a lot of Jimmy is still here. He says it's a great story and a great chat. And also Emily, who has been immersed in the church for much of her life, says drums are very symbolic in scripture and very powerful spiritually. Jennifer, good evening, my love. I didn't want to interrupt Chris earlier when you sent me a message, but Jennifer, great vocalist, I've had the pleasure of working with on a few occasions. She says music is soothing and healing. It is indeed. Yeah. And we could go off on a tangent as well and start to talk about the progression of music, especially from Africa to onto the slave ships, to the plantations, into the churches, why the sound of gospel music is so powerful. It's a struggle music. It's a celebratory music as well. It's a deep conversation, but we continue. One thing I wrote down here, has the in the culture that you're in now, because it's seen as such a spiritual thing. Is there has there ever risen sort of a drug culture alongside it as well, or is it kind of frowned upon? Is the circle that the music that you're in and the instruments, do people that go there, do you have some people who get off the head smoking weed, loving it, or is it just like, no, this is just all about the music?
It depends, Andy, because if I'm invited somewhere to play or facilitate something, the people come, whoever they are, but from a clinical point of view, that wouldn't be happening. No. Because I work in psychiatry and I work in education as well. So I'm in schools doing therapy with kids, neurodiverse kids, spectrum kids, working with them. So they wouldn't be doing that. But psychedelics is really big in therapy now. There's a kind of a lot of neuroscientific research going on. It's becoming a bit of a thing, microdosing and complementary in psychotherapy. Music psychotherapy.
We're getting into Joe Rogan territory now. That's something I can't really. I'd have no kind of. So actually, no. I was going to say I wouldn't really be able to have any comment on that. But you're the one doing all the talking. What are your thoughts on that? You buy into it?
Yeah, I think it's always been there. It's just people that can be seen as credible research, instead of just, opinions are valued, because that's where research comes from, is the population of the people and their lived experience that we're researching. So it's valid, and it's great that people are waking up that are involved in neuroscience and psychotherapy, and arts therapies, and taking these things on board, and how they can assist recovery or, rehabilitation, with microdosing. I'm a massive fan of full spectrum CBD, slightly tweaked. That, I think, works wonders. As I said, I hate with acid, so I wouldn't take psychedelics myself, because I don't like them. I don't get on with them. But full spectrum CBD tweaked up, it works wonders, man. And all that's been researched. I think the CBD thing, there's a lot of marketing and money making, but there's a real percentage of genuine, scientists and therapists and people producing and making and researching, and how this can assist and help. And on the back of that, I think it's triggered, let's look into psychedelics as well, microdosing stuff. So they're valid therapeutic tools within our modern societies that have been used, since the beginning of man, innit?
Yeah, indeed. So where does that bring us to today then, from the journey at the beginning to where you are now? You're clearly in an incredible place.
Now, I guess, so, as I said, I'm remarried to my amazing wife, Leanne, who puts up with my own neurodiversity and is not a qualified psychologist, but she's very, very powerfully insightful and has given me a lot of support and help and understanding of myself. And that's where I am now, working as a music therapist, involved with research, working in psychiatry, working in mental health, doing training. And the Hung Ensemble is kind of a new emerging thing now that the instruments have developed. And there's like 15 pieces of percussion that are all one instrument and that can be separated into two expressions in different modal keys that can have different kind of effects on people. So I've got the ensemble under my belt, the Pang Ensemble. We call it Pang Ensemble because the instruments are made of a material called Pang. That's what they're made of. So the brand name
P-A-N-G or P-E-N-G? Pang.
P-A-N-G. So the brand is Hang, the Hung Sound Sculpture. The instruments are made of a material called Pang. That's what gives it the distinct sweet sound that they have developed over years from being tuners and steel pan makers and inventing the instrument and evolving them, developing the material with acoustic scientists and other people. That's what gives it that beautiful sweet sound of Pang. But there's a whole ensemble of them now, you see, and there's myself, a mate of mine in Italy, who's a music therapist. We're the only guys that have this ensemble each in the whole world. So we're just like totally excited because now we're like starting to recruit people that are really kind of want to get connected and are interested in this music and this sound. So we'll be working in therapy, cultural arts and culture demonstrations and experiences and performance as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's just kind of emerged now because it's kind of all come together just recently with the developments. Yeah. So that's really exciting.
Amazing.
So that's where we're at now, man.
It's really great to sit and listen to the journey, to catch up and remind myself of, that 30-year history. And it's great to see you so passionate when you're sharing the words about it.
And you know what? I get back to Rob. I saw Lee about 3 years ago, met up with Lee in Bristol.
Lee Fisher.
And I met Rob last
and Rob Johnson.
New Year's Eve. I've been trying to get me and Rob had a little bit of dialogue, not loads. And I lost contact because I'm not on Facebook, I'm not very good with social media and that. But I don't know, somehow I saw this flyer for the Face Party in London, and I was like, Rob J. That's Rob J, no way. I'm going to go and see Rob. I said, Leanne, come on, we got to go. So Rob, the thing is, Rob didn't know we were going, right? So I kind of knew he was going to have a bit of a shock, but he had a real shock, man. It was like, energy was so powerful. We got there. We was on Brick Lane at this thing. The Face dude was there, and it was slingering around trying to find Rob. And there he was, just like, Rob. He was like, no. Yeah, he couldn't believe it. But he calmed down. It was amazing. Rob was playing. Some guys from Brum, met them. He had a good crack. So, yeah, saw Rob New Year's Day. New Year's Eve.
Stu Partridge has just come into the chat and he goes, "Little Chris, for fuck's sake." That was how you were lovingly referred to as Little Chris. There was Little Chris and there was Big Chris. Chris and Rob used to work together, didn't they, as graphic designers? And so you were Little Chris, he was Big Chris. It really has been great. And I know that a lot of people will have checked this out, our crew from back in the day, and will have loved to have seen this. You mentioned about Rob. I've tried to get Rob to come and talk to me on here. He's useless. He's absolutely useless at communication. I love him to pieces. And a few people have said, no, we'll get him on. And he did actually message me, said, Andy, I'm not being rude. I'm just shit at social media. But I will get him on because he's got some stories to tell himself. Yeah. But listen, I'm going to start to wrap this up because I've got a book club of all things, would you believe, to take care of in a little while. Mate, it's been lovely listening to you. Thank you for agreeing to do this. It's been really insightful. You've been really supportive of a lot of the conversations that I've been having. I know you've enjoyed a lot of the talks that I've had, and this is just another one in the brilliant library of content that I've got now. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Brilliant to see you and share. Thank you, Andy.
Well, this would be the perfect opportunity for me to have saved a video of the instrument to share with you, but that would have meant that I'd be quite professional, and that is what I'm not. So I'll just say thank you very much. Yeah.
You can send people to my website, pangensemble.com, if they're interested and want to connect with me, or,
So is that, I have been there myself, is it all one word or is it hyphenated?
Ensemble. Yeah, all one word. Pangensemble.com.
Well, let me type this down into here. Pangensemble.com.
Yeah.
There you go. I've put it in the chat. People will get it. And Emily says, "May the Lord above Chris bless you from your head to your foot in all you do. Music is the answer." Beautiful. All right, dude. I'll leave it there. Yeah, Thanks a lot, man. We'll keep in touch. Yeah. Take care. And there he goes, Little Chris, as he is lovingly known. That was great. I loved that. Thank you for being here to see me have a little chat with a friend of mine. You can see in the background there, actually. Can you see this? A good friend of ours is over, found this and gave it to me, gifted it to me. I haven't had the opportunity, to get it put on the wall, but I am going to get that put up on the wall in the background. It'll look nice. Thank you. It's still in one piece. You can see here, my next conversation will be with the wonderful Marcia Carr. That is going to be on Monday. And as always, I thank you for watching live. I thank you for coming back and checking out the video on demand. Do leave me a like. It helps me a lot. If you want to subscribe, then you can. You will see your name here on the screen if you've recently subscribed. Thank you very much. Shouts out again to Sean Hart. All the Access crew on the right-hand side supporting me on a monthly basis. And don't forget, if you need any graphics, videos or websites, then I am your man. Thanks a lot, guys. Lots of love.